We begin this hour with what has become a recurring theme of Donald Trump's second term in office, acting with impunity. Whether it's entering the U.S. into a war with Iran, demolishing an entire wing of the White House to build a ballroom, or turning the Justice Department into his very own law firm, we have seen how Trump operates like there are no consequences. And frankly, there haven't been many. While Republicans in Congress have all but sanctioned Trump's behavior, the courts are making it clear that a president's actions can and sometimes should be challenged. Trump had to face that reality check from several judges on Friday who ruled that his name must be stripped from the Kennedy Center walls, questioned the very IRS lawsuit he claims allowed him to make a $1.776 billion settlement fund to pay his supporters, and provided him immunity from any future tax audits and his family, and blocked his efforts to whitewash the events of January 6th by seeking to vacate the seditious conspiracy convictions of the members of the Oath Keepers. Joining us now to get into all of that, Joyce Vance, MS Now legal analyst and former U.S. attorney, and Andrew Weissman, MS Now legal analyst and author of the newly released and #1 New York Times bestselling Liar's Kingdom, How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. Thank you both for joining us. And Joyce Vance is at the table, ladies and gentlemen.
Lucky us.
We are very excited.
It is so nice to be with y'all.
Thank you. Well, let's start with you. You saw all of these cases that happened in 24 hours. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I mean, something that we don't see enough. You know, I was listening as you went through the litany of Trump's abuses of power. Something that we have sort of begun to normalize, like the frogs in the pot of boiling water, is just how off the rails this administration is. But the courts continue to respond. I think one of the moments of hope right now is that district judges, courts of appeals across the country are calling out the excesses.
Yeah, so Andrew Weissman, I want to talk to you, if we can, about this slush fund. I think that this slush fund is not just about the past. I also think it's about the future. I think that Donald Trump is sending a message. I think he is creating a permission structure for would-be criminals. He is telling them, if you commit a crime in my name, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. I'll pardon you. I'll make you whole financially. And I think that's a chilling message at any time, but it is especially chilling coming ahead of a contentious midterm. I want to throw up a headline from the Washington Post that talks about what the FBI is doing, and I think it's in Wisconsin. And I'm quoting here, the FBI in recent weeks has interviewed current and former election officials about the 2020 election in Milwaukee, ramping up wide-ranging reviews of voting in the swing states that President Trump lost that year. Election officials are cautiously watching the developments in Milwaukee to see if agents try to seize ballots, as they did in January in Fulton County, Georgia. The confiscation of tens of thousands of absentee ballots from Wisconsin's largest city would set off alarms because Milwaukee maintains its absentee ballots in a way that could allow agents to determine who voters selected, undermining the secrecy of their ballots. What's your take to all of that? I'm pretty troubled by it, but what's your take?
Well, I think you're totally right to think of the slush fund as not something that is looking backwards, but is looking forwards. Because if it wasn't enough that the president gave blanket pardons and commutations, that was already a permission structure. This is saying, and now we'll pay you for it. It is doubling down on that. Now, to sort of foot stomp on what Joyce said, we have seen this week a lot of hopeful signs. Obviously, the trial courts, the federal trial courts have done incredibly well. Republican and Democratic appointees, including judges who have been appointed by Donald Trump in his first term. We've seen tenacious lawyers bring these cases. We've seen models of integrity, the general counsel, the IRS refusing to go along with this. But we have seen the complicity. And that, to me, is the really bad sign. It is not just a question of Donald Trump. It is a question of the people who are complicit, whether they're in Congress or whether they're sitting at the top of the Justice Department and know better and are still going along with what I think is blatantly illegal, if not just downright improper.
Joyce, we've spent all morning talking about the judge who said that the president's name must come off the Kennedy Center and must reopen. President Trump did not like this. In a social media post yesterday at 11:15 a.m., he attacked the judge, says a judge whose wife is an anti-Trump hater, and he is too. Yet the Trump-hating judge wants to keep it open because his wife probably told him to do so. That was at 11:15. At 7:03 last night, he wrote, a highly conflicted, crooked federal judge, Judge Cooper and his wife, should be ashamed of themselves. Judge Cooper, like numerous other crooked judges on my cases, should be impeached. And that comes after we don't know. I don't know when this social media post on Saturday came in, where basically Trump says, "I canceled my involvement with the failing and unsafe to be in Kennedy Center." So we see the range of emotions. I bring this.
Is it a range?
Okay, one emotion. He's stuck on one emotion. But I bring it up not because of the hilarity of the hurt feelings in put down on paper, but the attack on the judge and the attack on the judge's wife. We have seen this before. The damage that does to the judiciary. Talk about how dangerous it is to put a judge on blast like that, especially when it is the president of the United States.
The one place the federal judiciary doesn't expect the attacks against it to come from is the White House. Right. And Trump has totally changed that. I mean, federal judges always carry a certain amount of stress along with the job. The United States Marshals, which is a DOJ law enforcement agency, one of their primary tasks is to protect federal judges. And their overtime hours, as many of these judges have been threatened and called out by name by the president, are really disturbing. So here you have a judge whose wife, former DOJ employee, somebody with a really sterling reputation, not particularly political, and the president calls her out by name in a social media post, and in essence puts a bullseye on the judge's back by making these comments. Look, this is a judge who simply made a ruling based on the facts and the law. And if you're the president of the United States and you don't like the judge's decision, then you can have your Justice Department appeal that ruling. The attacks on the judiciary have just got to stop.
I mean, because one of the things with Donald Trump is that every accusation is him basically saying, this is how I would do it, right? Yeah. If projection. It feels like for him, he can't imagine that someone will be able to put aside the way they vote or their political leanings to actually look at the facts of the case and determine a ruling against anybody. Andrew, I want to shift gears a little bit to this political headline from Thursday, where the DOJ makes its broad case for presidential power in the Maureen Comey case, obviously a relative of Jim Comey. A lawyer for the Justice Department outlined an expansive vision of presidential power under the Constitution during a pretrial conference Thursday. DOJ lawyer said at the pretrial hearing that Comey's firing was valid even if there were political motivations. The U.S. District Judge, Jesse Furman, pressed her on whether there are any limits to the president's Article II powers. Could the president, for example, decide to fire people in order to achieve an all-white executive branch or all-black, he asked. She stammered in response, finally saying, "I can't answer on behalf of the government." Furman replied, "You're here representing the government," putting aside that last part where the president's making it very difficult for his lawyers to do, for our lawyers, the government's lawyers, to do its job. Do you see this as the next stage where the DOJ says, okay, yeah, it was political, but we can do it if so?
I don't see it as the next stage. I think it's the stage we are in. The same kind of back and forth that you described that Judge Furman had in New York happened just a couple of weeks ago when the administration tried to defend the executive orders, 4 of them, against law firms, where the judges asked the same question, which is, are you saying they could do this for racial reasons? They could do it essentially for any reason or no reason at all. They can take these actions. And the answer was yes. This gets rid of the idea of civil service. And I know this may not sound exciting to people, and they may be thinking, why do we care about that? The reason you care is that you want career people like Joyce Vance in the Department of Justice, who are going to make decisions based on the facts and the law and leave politics at the door. Matter of fact, she wouldn't even think about politics. It would just be obviously about what is right for this case and what is the just thing to do. And that is what happens with civil service. If you don't have civil service, with every changing administration, you get rid of all of that expertise and you put in your cronies, and you would have that changing every 4 years. There's a reason to have this career base. But what this Department of Justice is arguing and has acted on is sending letters to people saying you are fired for no reason. They literally say, because I can do it, you're out. And that is a violation of the civil service rules. And they're saying civil service rules are simply out the window, which is something that no president, just to make sure we're not normalizing this, no president, Republican or Democratic, before this has taken that position.
Joyce Vance, Andrew Weissman, thank you both very much for coming to the weekend. Andrew's new book is called Liar's Kingdom: How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. Assuming you can find it, because it's sold out everywhere in New York City, it seems. Andrew,
I want to bring in MS Now contributor Jake Sherman and is co-founder of Punchbowl News. Sam Stein is managing editor of The Bulwark. Also with us, Mark McKinnon, former advisor to President George W. Bush and Senator John McCain, as well as creator of The Circus. It's good to have you all here. Sam, do you see all of these things Trump is doing to try to preserve Republican power as real when he doesn't do the one thing that would seem to be the most obvious, respond to Americans' concerns about the economy?
I think Trump operates with a lot of id. Like, what's on his mind is what you're going to get on his social feed. If he sees something on TV, he'll probably post about it. If someone hands him some AI-generated slop that he thinks is funny, he'll probably post about that too. It's not much like a three-dimensional chess here. And if we've observed anything in these past 10 years with Donald Trump in our lives, it's that it's really hard to keep him on script, right? Like, you can actually script out a speech for him, but he will deviate in a number of disjointed directions, and then he'll call it a weave. And so, yes, he knows very much that he needs to focus on getting the costs down in this country. He knows very much that consumer sentiment is in the pits. I'm assuming he knows that a lot of this is tied to his tariffs and to the Iran war. But one thing he can't do is stay unscripted. Another thing he can't do is admit fault. And to say that people are suffering would be to admit fault, and he's not going to do that.
So, Mark, I want to use just one example from Trump's social media spree over the weekend. He's now talking about headlining a rally during the Great American State Fair after that wave of artists dropped out of the planned concert series. Quote, "I'm thinking about bringing the #1 attraction anywhere in the world, the man who gets much larger audiences than Elvis in his prime, and he does so without a guitar, the man who loves our country more than anyone else, the man who some say is the greatest president in history, the GOAT, Donald J. Trump, to take the place of these highly paid third-rate artists and give a major speech." What's your sense of why Trump posts something like that when Americans are focused on the war, on the economy? I'm going to give you two of the things I hear most from his detractors. One, it's a sign of mental decline, or as one op-ed suggested today, escalating narcissism. What do you see?
Well, Chris, I think what's happening here mostly is that he's now more concerned about his legacy than he is about the midterms or politics. So everything he's doing, from the ballroom to the arch to his face it's all about him and his legacy, and also grifting as much as possible for him and his family. Let me tell a quick story about the musicians in the 250th. My job for the 2000 2004 conventions was to get the music. I was a bad songwriter back in the old days in Nashville. That's why I switched to politics. But it was the most miserable job in the world, because everybody's, at a convention, they're like, get Beyonce, get Bono, get the Rolling Stones. And of course, I'd make 1,000 calls. And after 2 months of making 1,000 calls, I had the Oak Ridge Boys, Wayne Newton, and Lee Greenwood. So I know that's what happened here, that Republicans can't get musical talent. And so Trump is now stepping in to make it all about him, of course.
So, Jake, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum was asked about Trump taking over this part of the 250th as headliners. Here's what he said.
He said that he is going to now have a Make America Great Again rally that he hosts. Is that going to be a standard political rally?
Well, I think President Trump it's important that whoever would be president of the country at the 200th, the 150th, the 100th, the 250th, the president plays a key figure in helping to, again, celebrate, kick off, and be at the opening of these events. These events, again, across the country celebrating America. And it's just, it's almost confusing to me why it's somehow that people want to turn this into outrage as opposed to turn it into celebration.
Is it a celebration? Are you sensing celebration when you look at the rundown, or when you see maybe what's happening on the ground where you are in D.C.?
This isn't really complicated, Chris. He couldn't get artists, so he's going to speak, and that's what Burgum is effectively saying. You mentioned earlier, Chris, about the implications of what will happen if he loses the majority. And I get the sense from my conversations with a lot of people in the administration around Trump and on Capitol Hill that the realization hasn't really fully settled in, that if they don't keep the majority, his presidency is effectively over, barring some massive course change in which he starts doing deals with Democrats, which I see as very unlikely. So I actually don't know if he is really, I think he's attuned to the fact that costs are high. I don't think he's really attuned to what he needs to do to lower them, because he just keeps talking about things, whether it's the weaponization fund, the ballroom, the America 250 thing, which is obviously important, but not really a focal point of getting people's costs down. He keeps talking about these things more than he talks about anything else. And I just don't see a world in which that matters to any single Republican trying to win re-election.
It's worth remembering, Sam, that at one time Donald Trump's postings and what he had to say did seem to have an impact. Certainly, he got elected twice, right? So either people liked what he said or thought if they didn't like it, it was not the most important thing. Do you get a sense now he's just posting to and for his base? What do you see with all of this?
Again, I just think he's reactive. So let's just take this this incident with the 250th celebration, the musical acts, right? Like, he sees what's happening and how embarrassing it is. He, when Milli Vanilli is like, no, we don't want this.
Do you think he's embarrassed?
Yes. When Milli Vanilli, which is not a real group, they were a fake group that had backup singers singing. Okay. When they're like, no, this is too much, we don't want this. Yeah, that's embarrassing. And so he's going to react to that. He's going to divert. He's going to plan his own speech. He's going to lash out at the entertainers. He watches and consumes copious amounts of news coverage. We know this. We know he watches a lot of TV. We know that he's being fed social media posts. And I just think this is someone who, he's approaching 80 years old. He doesn't really care about whether he's acting in a presidential manner. And he's just going to lash out when he wants to lash out. You kind of see this type of behavior in your old uncle who is acting a little bit crazy and probably watches Fox News a little bit too much. But in this case, this man happens to be the president.
Mark, there's a really interesting Newsweek analysis of state-level polling. It shows Trump has lost ground in every single state since taking office. And the drop has been really stark in some red states. In Florida and Ohio, his numbers have gone from positive to negative. He lost 23 points in Kentucky. In Wyoming, the most pro-Trump state in America, he's gone down 25 points. So looking at that, is it simply too late to try to convince Americans you can improve their economic situation, no matter what he does or says?
Well, Chris, the first thing you've got to do as president, which Bill Clinton did probably better than anybody, is to acknowledge that people are having economic pain. I mean, Clinton say, I feel your pain. Trump doesn't feel their pain. He doesn't. Not only doesn't feel, he doesn't think there is any pain. But I can tell you from having done political communications for several decades, I could spin a lot of stuff, but you can't spin people out of whatever they're feeling economically. You can't just hit them with statistics and say, no, you're wrong. You're not feeling bad. No, gas prices are not up. No, grocery store prices are not up. That's just something that people feel in their gut. They know they're paying their bills, and they just can't be talked out of it. So you've got to just start by acknowledging it. And then secondly, you've got to convince them that you're doing something about it.
So I'm wondering then, Jake, if you look at the range of things that he has done, the push for gerrymandering to change some of the voting laws, has he come to the conclusion that the only way to win is to change the rules?
I don't know if it certainly seemed his actions would seem to indicate that, yes, he thinks that he has a better chance of winning if he has more Republican seats. But let's be real here. Only twice in the last nearly 100 years has the president's party held the House in a midterm. I mean, it was 1998 during Clinton's impeachment and 2002 after 9/11. So whoever is in office has to provide, the political climate has to be so overwhelmingly good for them in order to defy this historical trend. I mean, I didn't make this up. This is the fact. So unless you believe something that Donald Trump is doing and Republicans are doing is so overwhelmingly positive for the country, everything is going so well that we're going to buck 100 years of 50 elections, 100 years of trends, then I think the obvious answer is probably the right answer, that they're not going to win and they are trying to pad their majorities. I think that much is obvious. But by the way, it hasn't gone that well. South Carolina rebuffed him. Georgia rebuffed him. So it's not been a slam dunk, although it has been helpful for them.
Well, Sam, that brings me back to something else Frank Bruni wrote about, which is how skeptical Trump is of polls. I mean, he won in 2016 when at the start his candidacy was treated as a joke. He defied polls, beating Hillary Clinton. But if he thinks, as Frank points out, that maybe the Iran war isn't an albatross but an ascot, those are Frank's words, would that just be delusional?
To a degree, yeah. I don't know how much the Iran war itself is on the minds of voters who tend not to vote on matters of foreign policy. I do think it's very evident that the oil shock and the rise of gas prices and all the effects that's had throughout our economy, from everything for the price of food, for instance, that definitely has an impact. And to sit there and say, well, this is momentary, or it's the price to pay to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, or in Trump's case saying it's not actually that bad. In fact, things are going great and it could have been much worse. That is the type of sort of detachment from reality that can get you in real trouble, right? Like, as Mark was saying, if you are just not even, nodding to the economic fears and pain that people are, feeling in their lives, then you come across looking not just insensitive, but totally detached.
Congress returns from the Memorial Day recess this week with new targets for questioning in its Epstein investigation. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is scheduled to appear before a House Appropriations Subcommittee Tuesday, where he could face new questions about the DOJ's mishandling of the investigation. In her interview with the House Oversight Committee Friday, former Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared to shift blame for the mishandling of the files released onto Blanche, saying she, quote, delegated oversight to Blanche for the investigation and the release of the files. Bondi also reportedly raised questions about FBI Director Kash Patel's role in the files release. Notably, Congressman Robert Garcia, the top Democrat on the Oversight Committee, says the panel will subpoena both Blanche and Patel. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Khanna of California, a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. You have been one of the good to see you. You have been one of the leading voices pushing for transparency on the Epstein files. You and Tom Massey even asked a federal judge early this year to appoint either a special master or independent monitor to ensure the release of all of the documents as required by law. The judge notably declined. He did say in his ruling that you all raised legitimate concerns about whether DOJ is faithfully complying with federal law. And then he kicked the ball back to Congress, saying, quote, the representatives are also, of course, at liberty to pursue oversight of DOJ via the tools available to Congress. So my question to you is pretty direct, because in my view, no matter how many times you question Pam Bondi or Todd Blanche and Kash Patel, no matter how many times you bring them back up to the Hill, DOJ is not going to comply with the full release of the documents as required by the Epstein Files Transparency Act. What are you going to do about that?
But Thomas Massey and I drafted the law. They're in violation of the law, and the people they're hurting are the survivors. There has not been a single investigation or prosecution since the release of these millions of files. I mean, think about this. The Justice Department is prosecuting and investigating Jean Carroll, a sexual assault survivor, and they have not opened a single investigation against the people who actually committed sexual assault in the Epstein files. We are going to continue to aggressively prosecute and hold accountable on the Oversight Committee. When we take back the Congress, there should be a Epstein-class subcommittee that brings in people from Justice and the FBI. But ultimately, it's going to take a new administration to actually go after the people responsible.
So you're saying we're going to have to either wait until January of next year or either 2 years after that? Is that what I'm hearing? There's nothing Congress can do right now. I know Congressman Wesley Bell has a new commission new bill where he's calling for a commission right now to try to further force the release of these files from the Justice Department. Is there nothing you all can do right now on that point?
We're going to continue to call in Kash Patel, call in Blanche, call in the people who were at the island. But until we have subpoena power, until Hakeem Jeffries is speaker, until Robert Garcia is chair, we can't actually get the career individuals and many of the people at Justice or FBI who were involved in the cover-up. So we will fight to do everything we can. We've gotten 3 million files released because of the courage of the survivors, because of our aggressiveness. 20 or so people have resigned. But in terms of beginning investigations and prosecutions, that's going to take a new attorney general. In terms of accountability, that's going to take Robert Garcia being chair of the Oversight Committee.
Congressman, you all are having to come back to work after a couple of weeks on recess. One of the things that was put on the back burner, and when you guys skipped town, Republicans made y'all skip town, was this Trump vote on Iran. Do you think that Republican leadership has to bring that back? What have you heard, most importantly, from Republicans who already were saying we're on board with reining in Trump's powers on this war resolution?
Well, it was put in the back burner because they didn't have the votes. I mean, I have almost never seen anything like this. They had us in the chamber for an hour, and then they pulled the vote after an hour because they were going to lose. And why are they going to lose? Because farmers are upset with the cost of fertilizer. Americans are upset with the cost of gas. And they've seen this go month after month with gas and food prices higher. I believe that we have the votes to win this in the House. Massey and I introduced this 2 months ago. Could have avoided the whole war. We do have the votes next week. The vote is going to be on Wednesday. Tuesday is the California primary, so many of the California members are going to be taking red eyes back in. But who knows what tricks they'll pull. But if they have a clean vote, we have the votes to win.
Well, Congressman Khanna, speaking of California and the big primary vote there on Tuesday, you've endorsed for Governor Tom Steyer. As you well know, he is a very wealthy man. Wealth inequality has been a major issue for you. You've talked about how billionaires need to pay their fair share in everything. You've supported a wealth tax. So I'm just curious, why are you endorsing the billionaire candidate in this race?
Well, the billionaire candidate is the only candidate who's actually willing to say that the billionaires should pay more tax. And there is a wealth tax, 5% for billionaires, that would keep 2 million Californians on health care. The federal government took away the Obamacare subsidies. This 5% tax, so 250 billionaires would support health care for these 2 million Californians. Think about this, Jonathan. 250 billionaires in California, in my state, have half the economy, have $2.1 trillion. That's half of California's GDP. 19 billionaires in this country have 12% of the economy, is 3 times the concentration of the Gilded Age, and Steyer supports that. Now, what I will say is we need total campaign finance reform. I don't like the idea of super PACs, and I don't like the idea of individuals spending their own money on these elections. The system is broken, and we do need that reform.
Congressman, I want to pull up some new polling. The latest polling that we have, May 27th through the 28th. Javier Becerra is at 28%, Tom Steyer at 22%, Steve Hilton's at 21%, and then it drops off to 12% from there. It could be 2 Democrats, might be a Democrat and a Republican. One of the things that I had been watching and been hearing from a lot of folks in Democrats in California was they were worried that 2 Republicans were going to get to the top. That seems to have dissipated quite a bit on the gubernatorial side. But I do wonder, you haven't endorsed in this, I don't think, but when it comes to the LA race, Karen Bass and you see Spencer Pratt, what do you think we're learning about how Californians feel about the incumbents in general?
Well, I do think the Democrat is going to make it on the governor's race, and there's a good chance that both Becerra and Steyer may make it. A lot of Democrats have held their ballots. We do need Democrats to get their ballots in if you're in California, because Republicans right now are outpacing us relatively on handing their ballots in. So hopefully people will get their ballots in. Look, I think that there is was a lot of hurt and anger after the fires. My view is that the blame of that really needs to go on Donald Trump. They still owe the state $50 billion. They have not worked with Mayor Bass or our governor to get the resources needed, and they have really punished California. But understandably, people who still haven't seen their homes rebuilt, who were upset with how that was handled, they are upset with the incumbents, and that's why you have the race you do. But I hope people will ultimately look at all of the views that the candidates have. And Mayor Bass has a long record on advocacy for higher minimum wage, for civil rights, for economic justice.
Congressman Khanna of California, who was in South Carolina on Friday at Congressman Jim Clyburn's very famous, very politically important fish fry. Just real quickly, should we read anything into your South Carolina sojourn?
Everyone should go down to South Carolina if you want to have hope for this country. What they pulled off, Jonathan, was miraculous. I mean, I've said that we have a modern-day Dred Scott court. Yes, in redistricting. I mean, Dred Scott took away Black Americans' right for citizenship. The modern-day Dred Scott court has taken away Black Americans' right to choose their representatives. And Jim Clyburn and Crystal Spain, they beat that, and they saved that district. It shows America's remarkable ability for self-correction. But what I said is, you know, there's always a question of can a progressive... Yeah, 2 seconds. Can a progressive do well in South Carolina? The progressive movement is rooted in the Black freedom movement, from Du Bois to Randolph to Rustin to King, to Jesse Jackson. So it was really